Very recently, I was in Washington, D.C.
Hmm.
Just last month because the Jenna Quinn Law, which bears my name, is federal legislation now. So I'm
Wow.
couldn't be more grateful to be alive and to be able to testify that there is federal legislation that is called the Jenna Quinn Law in Washington, D.C. that we have now
Wow.
that helps protect children and youth from predators.
That's amazing. So you brought that up, and I'm sure some of the viewers who might have heard of you and are acquainted with the law, uh, they know what it is. But if you don't mind, give the viewers some feedback, the scope of the law, what it advocates, how it works, and what has happened since it was instituted.
Yes. So it bears my name because I'm a survivor.
Hmm.
And going back to 2009, actually, well, even before that, in 2007, I met who is now one of our amazing senators here in Texas, Senator Tan Parker. And at the time, he was a representative, and I helped give a tour at the Children's Advocacy Center that I received victim services at. And he was with his lovely wife there. And I just explained my story to him. I told him what would have helped the education, the awareness. If someone was available, if these things were available for me, it would have been easier for me to tell. And I'm very grateful he took that to heart and passed Jenna's Law, which was the first of its kind in the whole country. And so, what this did in Texas is it set the standard of care now for child safety for other states. So, it requires child sexual abuse specifically, education, training, and awareness for teachers, which are mandatory reporters, and they make up most of their reports, and also students, student safety, body awareness. Stranger danger is very real, and we always have to talk about the reality of strangers. But unfortunately, when we look at research, it shows that it's more acquaintance danger. Over 93% of the time, a child or youth is actually sexually abused by someone they know, someone they trust, and sometimes it's even someone that they love because that person has worked to gain their trust,
Hmm.
has worked to gain an emotional connection with them,
Hmm.
has worked to gain some sort of dependence,
Wow.
on that. Yeah, on that victim. So, stranger danger is important. I grew up with stranger danger. Most of us grew up with that. But unfortunately, that's not what empirical research shows. We have
Mhm.
to teach awareness and we
Yes.
have to teach acquaintance danger and what does, grooming, red flag grooming indicators look like because most of our enemies will hide in plain sight.
We mentioned briefly before we started about wolves in sheep's skin.
Mhm.
A lot of times, many people get blindsided because they always make, like you said, assumptions that if somebody harms your kid, you never be assumed is somebody from within the circle in which the family is comfortable with. And that's why a lot of times it's so hard to detect. And I always wonder in situations like that, because I know you have two aspects with this law: the preventative, which ideally should be the case, don't fall prey to it because you're educated to see the signs before it happens, and the healing one, for those who are aware of the signs or warning signs if something like that was to take place. Um, I always wish that we could anticipate and avoid. And my question now, and we're going to go back to the general law. I have some more questions with that, but I'm here intrigued by how can you uh, make more likely to prevent than instead mitigate the effect of it in case you are not able to avoid altogether. How your advocacy and the educational process, based on your experience, splits between those two: prevent, anticipate, don't happen, and if it does, heal. Deal with it, review and
Mhm.
heal. So I like what kind of parallel we can make out of that one.
Yeah, and there's different depths and there's different levels. So you have primary prevention, which means there was a close call, but it never got to any form of contact or non contact abuse, right? So you have primary prevention, and then you have, actual intervention where you say there was grooming that started to happen, but somewhere in that grooming cycle, there was awareness and the grooming cycle was interrupted. So it's not full on prevention because some grooming already took place, but it didn't advance any further, right?
Mhm.
But then if it does advance, like you said, to contact sexual abuse, well, then now there's intervention needed. Now there's a report that needs to be made. And then now there's healing and counseling that needs to happen. But what's interesting enough, if you look at the research, it shows that the mental health impact from the psychological grooming and the spiritual grooming that a lot of these offenders will do is actually just as devastating as if there's a physical sexual assault.
Right.
And that's because of the type of grooming that happens, right? So the research actually showed that just one grooming incident alone was enough to keep the child or the youth in fear, enough to paralyze them, enough to make them feel like they're too ashamed to say something, that a grooming episode has
Mhm.
happened. And so that just speaks to the depths of how that affects
Yeah.
that person as a whole, right?
Mhm.
So now we can see that there's something much deeper happening here.
Mhm.
Um, it's not as natural of an occurrence as you would think. It's not strictly physical. There's grooming, there's psychological and physical, and especially spiritual grooming that happens where it impacts the body, the soul, and the spirit, not just the body. And that alone is enough to make a survivor feel paralyzed through fear and intimidation. And
Mhm.
predators know that. And that's why they look for vulnerabilities. It's really interesting. If you look at the way that offender research shows the way that a sexual predator will groom, and if you also go through scriptures and you look at the way that our enemy, the adversary, if you
Mhm.
look at the way Satan grooms, they're actually mirrored. They are very identical.
Mhm.
And it's predatorial strategy, right? And so that's why you mentioned wolves in sheep's clothing. And we get that from the life and words of Jesus himself. So we get this term and we get this from Jesus because he told us it's not an option to be naive or not.
Mhm.
If you look at what he said, beware, right? Many will come professing one thing, but inwardly there are ravenous wolves. Inwardly, there's an appetite for something that is abnormal. Inwardly, there's a ravenous appetite for something else. And when you look at predators and when you look at the wolf, it's interesting that he chose the wolf. The wolf is an apex predator, which means they're the best hunter, right, for their territory. And it's because they're patient. They will watch, they will wait for weeks, they'll follow a flock of sheep. Well, sexual predators will groom for weeks. They will wait for weeks to study their target so that they will identify a target. I always tell victims, you were picked, you were identified, and you were picked because of whatever reason. And they hunt, they strategize, they premeditate, they calculate on what are the right things to say to this person, what kind of commonality can I establish, can I fill an emotional need, can I come in and meet a situation for them, can I be a figurative role for them of some sort. And so they are looking for vulnerabilities and ways that they can develop some sort of trust with the victim.